In the early spring of 1944, a formidable P-47 Thunderbolt pilot, a member of the distinguished 56th Fighter Group, found himself on a return leg from an arduous mission, having successfully escorted a bomber formation deep into the heart of German territory. Now, with the primary objective complete, the opportunity arose to engage secondary targets. Below, a sprawling Luftwaffe airfield presented itself, its expansive grounds dotted with numerous Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, seemingly vulnerable as they stood arrayed on the tarmac. Following the customary protocol, the flight leader initiated the assault, and the pilot commenced his dive, aligning his aircraft with the runway from the eastern approach, a maneuver meticulously practiced countless times during training exercises back in England. Suddenly, the tranquil sky transformed into a maelstrom of anti-aircraft fire. Streaks of tracer rounds ascended from every quadrant of the enemy base, forming an impenetrable curtain of lead so dense it appeared almost tangible. A devastating impact struck the pilot's wingman's engine, sending the aircraft spiraling away, leaving a thick plume of obsidian smoke in its wake. Irrevocably committed to the attack, the pilot hurtled earthward at a blistering 300 miles per hour, acutely aware that every defensive position on the airfield had anticipated his precise trajectory. They were poised, waiting. As he unleashed a torrent of bullets upon the stationary aircraft, observing his rounds ricochet off a Bf-109, his own Thunderbolt absorbed numerous hits. The powerful fighter shuddered violently as 20mm shells tore through its wing structure. Instinctively, he wrenched the controls, the raw surge of adrenaline momentarily overriding the pain of the damage, and against all odds, managed to guide his severely battered warplane across the English Channel. This harrowing encounter was far from an isolated incident. Rather, it epitomized the grim reality faced by American fighter pilots throughout late 1943 and early 1944. Ground attack missions, specifically targeting enemy aircraft on their airfields, had devolved into virtual suicide runs, resulting in casualty figures so alarming they caused even hardened bomber crews to recoil. The underlying issue was not a deficiency in courage or piloting prowess, but rather a fatal flaw in tactical predictability. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of this video. Your like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. Please also share in the comments where you are from and your thoughts on the topic discussed. Across occupied Europe, every Luftwaffe airfield had been strategically designed with the prevailing westerly winds in mind. Consequently, aircraft typically executed their takeoffs and landings heading eastward, directly into the wind. It was a logical extension that American pilots adopted the same eastward approach for their attacks, as this trajectory offered the longest possible strafing run down the runway. However, the Luftwaffe was anything but naive. German anti-aircraft gun crews, with astute tactical foresight, positioned their weaponry precisely where it would inflict maximum damage, concentrating their formidable firepower on these predictable eastern avenues. Each 20mm quad mount, every 3.7cm flak gun, and every machine gun nest was meticulously sighted to cover this expected line of attack. When American fighters roared in from the east, they were effectively flying directly into a pre-registered kill zone where German gunners had already computed and calibrated their range, deflection, and firing solutions. It was akin to plunging into a meticulously engineered meat grinder, specifically designed to obliterate American fighter aircraft. The appalling loss rates served as a stark and brutal testament to this reality. During strafing operations conducted in January and February of 1944, 8th Fighter Command experienced an alarming rate of aircraft losses, nearly 4 times higher than those sustained in air-to-air combat engagements. Pilots who had successfully navigated months of intense dogfighting against the Luftwaffe's elite were now being shot down by ground gunners who, in many instances, never even glimpsed their adversaries' faces. A fundamental shift in strategy was desperately needed, and it was required with utmost urgency, for the impending invasion of Europe necessitated absolute Allied air superiority, not merely in the skies, but decisively on the ground as well. The Luftwaffe had dedicated years to meticulously perfecting airfield defense, elevating it to a sophisticated science. This was no impromptu collection of scattered machine guns around a perimeter. German engineers had meticulously transformed every operational airfield across occupied France, Belgium, and the Netherlands into formidable layered strongholds. These bastions featured overlapping fields of fire, creating engagement zones that were virtually impenetrable without incurring catastrophic damage. A thorough inspection of a typical Luftwaffe airfield in early 1944 would reveal an astonishing array of between 40 and 80 distinct anti-aircraft positions. The German defensive strategy employed a defense-in-depth doctrine, a concept effectively borrowed from their highly successful ground warfare tactics. The outermost defensive ring, situated approximately 800 to 1,000 meters from the runway, was equipped with nimble 20mm Flak 38 guns, the very same weapons that had wreaked havoc on RAF bombers during the Battle of Britain. These rapid-firing cannons delivered 120 rounds per minute and were strategically placed to engage attacking aircraft during their initial approach, long before they could effectively align themselves for a strafing pass. Closer in, at a distance of 400 to 600 meters, lay the intermediate defensive layer, comprising potent 37mm and 40mm guns that unleashed heavier shells, often equipped with devastating proximity fuses. These were the true arbiters of destruction. A single 37mm round possessed the destructive power to shear a wing clean off a P-47 Thunderbolt or sever the entire tail section of a P-51 Mustang. German crews underwent rigorous and constant training in tracking fast-moving aerial targets, and their proficiency was undeniable. Survivors of these perilous strafing runs frequently recounted the terrifying precision with which these medium-caliber guns tracked their aircraft, their barrels swiveling with unnerving accuracy to follow their flight path as they plunged into the attack. The innermost defensive ring, however, proved to be perhaps the most perilous of all. Quad-mounted 20mm guns, positioned directly adjacent to the runway approaches, were capable of unleashing a staggering nearly 500 rounds per minute per mount. At distances under 300 meters, these weapons did not require pinpoint accuracy. They simply deluged the sky with such an overwhelming volume of metal that any aircraft attempting to traverse their fire cone was, statistically speaking, doomed. German gunners grimly referred to this impenetrable barrage as the Feuerwand, or firewall. Yet, the true brilliance of the Luftwaffe's elaborate defensive architecture extended beyond the mere potency of the guns themselves. It resided in their strategic placement, meticulously calibrated to operational realities. German airfield commanders possessed an intimate understanding that their own aircraft consistently took off and landed heading eastward, capitalizing on the prevailing westerly winds. They also accurately predicted that Allied attacking fighters would invariably adopt this identical approach vector. to maximize their time over target. Consequently, they concentrated their defensive firepower on the eastern approaches, creating an impregnable wall of flak. Each gun position boasted pre-calculated firing solutions tailored for targets approaching from specific compass headings. Gunners were thus spared the uncertainty of estimation. They had conducted hundreds of practice firing sessions at precisely these angles. The Germans even employed a cunning deception, positioning dummy aircraft on the western side of their airfields as an elaborate lure. These decoys consisted of damaged wrecks or meticulously crafted wooden mock-ups, painted to convincingly resemble operational fighters. The underlying rationale was elegantly simple. Should an American pilot somehow approach from the west, he would expend valuable ammunition on these worthless targets while navigating comparatively lighter defenses, only to be forced to break off and flee directly into the heavily concentrated eastern flak belt during his escape. Intelligence reports gleaned from interrogated Luftwaffe personnel unequivocally confirmed that German airfield defense crews operated under explicit orders: engage targets at maximum range from the east, compel them to traverse multiple overlapping fire zones, and sustain concentrated fire even after the attacking aircraft had passed overhead, ensuring damage during their egress. The official manual employed by German anti-aircraft units specifically stipulated that enemy fighter bombers will approach from the landing direction, and mandated the deployment of forces accordingly. American pilots, therefore, were not merely confronting a barrage of weaponry, they were facing a sophisticated defensive philosophy that had accurately anticipated their every move. Colonel Hubert Zemke, a man of exceptional caliber, was not the type of officer to simply accept casualties as an unavoidable cost of military operations. As the distinguished commander of the 56th Fighter Group, famously known as the legendary Wolf Pack, he had forged a reputation for combining aggressive tactical acumen with a rigorous analytical approach, a combination quite rare among fighter pilots of his era. While many other group commanders focused primarily on individual bravery and inherent flying skill, Zemke approached the complexities of air combat much like an engineer meticulously dissecting a problem. And in early 1944, he confronted a critical issue that was claiming the lives of his invaluable pilots at an alarmingly unacceptable rate. Driven by a profound sense of responsibility, Zemke initiated a meticulous data collection effort. Following each strafing mission, he personally debriefed every surviving pilot, painstakingly charting the precise locations where their aircraft had sustained damage, identifying which enemy gun positions had engaged them first, and meticulously documenting their approach vectors. He further requested comprehensive reconnaissance photographs of Luftwaffe airfields, spending countless hours poring over them with his intelligence officer, marking every discernible flak position with a grease pencil. What eventually emerged from this exhaustive analysis was a pattern so glaringly obvious that it seemed almost inconceivable no one had recognized and acted upon it sooner. The Luftwaffe had unequivocally constructed its defenses with attacks from the east in mind. Full stop. The western approaches, by stark contrast, possessed perhaps only a third of the gun emplacements, and those that existed were strategically positioned to engage aircraft climbing out after an attack run, not incoming aircraft preparing for their initial pass. More critically, the formidable 37mm and 40mm heavy guns, responsible for the majority of the devastating damage, were all sighted in with pre-calculated firing solutions exclusively for eastward approaches.
Zemke's profound insight centered on a crucial realization. These heavy anti-aircraft guns simply could not traverse swiftly enough to effectively engage targets
approaching from unexpected angles. Anti-aircraft weaponry in 1944 was not a simple point-and-shoot affair. Engaging a fighter aircraft hurtling through the sky at 300 miles per hour demanded that the gun crew meticulously calculate lead, elevation, and deflection. The Germans had performed all this intricate mathematical work in advance for eastward approaches. However, a target arriving from the west, attacking in the diametrically opposite direction of normal landing patterns, would necessitate that the gunners completely reverse their preset firing solutions within the fleeting handful of seconds between visual acquisition and the moment the target entered weapons range. It represented the fundamental difference between aiming at a target one had practiced hitting 1,000 times and attempting to accurately shoot at something suddenly appearing from behind. With this revelation, Zemke proposed a truly radical departure from established doctrine. Attack Luftwaffe airfields from the west, directly contravening the normal traffic pattern, strafing in the opposite direction of takeoffs and landings. His staff, initially, considered his proposal to be sheer lunacy. The prevailing conventional wisdom dictated that one attacked along the runway axis to maximize time on target, and runways were inherently oriented east-west due to the dominant winds. Attacking from the west, they argued, would mean strafing across the runway rather than along its length, thereby affording less time to engage parked aircraft. But Zemke, ever the pragmatist, had meticulously crunched the numbers. If attacking from the west meant his pilots incurred 70% less flak damage, they could readily absorb a slightly reduced time on target. A dead pilot, after all, could not destroy enemy aircraft. Lev pilots, who survived their initial pass, however, could return for a second. The crucial kill-to-loss ratio would dramatically improve, even if the effectiveness of an individual pass decreased marginally. Zemke was not interested in theoretically perfect attacks. His paramount concern was in devising attacks that his men would survive. The innovative tactical doctrine, subsequently christened reverse pattern strafing, emerged as a crucial strategy for ensuring the survival of his air crews. This audacious approach diverged significantly from the conventional anticipated flight paths that German defensive emplacements had been meticulously engineered to counter. Instead, American fighter aircraft were instructed to execute a low-altitude ingress from the western flank, leveraging the element of surprise to engage stationary enemy aircraft with overwhelming force before anti-aircraft artillery crews could mount an effective response. Following their devastating assault, these American pilots would then rapidly disengage by moving eastward, ascending through what had traditionally constituted the Germans' primary approach corridor. By the time the German gunners could recalibrate their positions and pivot their formidable heavy weapon systems to track the departing threat, the American fighters would already be accelerating away at an extremely low altitude, often skimming the treetops, rendering them impervious to the limited depression capabilities of the enemy flak guns. It became imperative for Zemke to validate the efficacy of this groundbreaking methodology, necessitating a full-scale combat trial against a formidable and heavily fortified objective. The chosen date for this pivotal demonstration was May 8, 1944. The designated objective was Oschersleben, a strategically vital Luftwaffe airfield situated approximately 80 miles to the west of Berlin. Allied intelligence reports indicated that this installation served as the operational base for components of Jagdgeschwader 11. Widely recognized as one of the Luftwaffe's most elite and formidable fighter formations. In preceding months, this very airfield had endured numerous assaults, all conducted utilizing the standard eastward approach vectors. These conventional incursions had proven costly for 8th Fighter Command, which had sustained the loss of 11 fighter aircraft, while managing to eliminate perhaps only twice that number of German planes on the ground. Such an unfavorable attrition ratio was clearly unsustainable and underscored the urgent need for a radical shift in operational tactics. Consequently, Colonel Zemke's renowned 56th Fighter Group was tasked with implementing a fundamentally different approach. The mission briefing convened on that crucial morning diverged markedly from established operational protocols. Colonel Zemke's operations officer meticulously delineated the audacious assault strategy. A formation of 16 P-47 Thunderbolts was slated to approach Oschersleben from the west, maintaining an exceedingly low altitude, expertly utilizing natural terrain features to evade premature radar detection. Their emergence into visibility would occur a mere 2 miles from the airfield, affording German defenders scant moments to organize a coherent response. The plan then called for an aggressive strafing run, moving westward across the aircraft parking revetments and dispersed operational areas prior to an eastward egress. Many pilots, seasoned veterans who had previously engaged Oschersleben, regarded the briefing maps with palpable skepticism. Their ingrained training and combat experience unequivocally dictated you attack down the runway, not across it. However, Zemke had deliberately selected his flight leaders, choosing individuals who possessed unwavering trust in his strategic acumen, and demonstrated a remarkable capacity for tactical improvisation under duress. Captain Walker Mahurin, already an acknowledged ace, credited with 16 aerial victories, was designated to command the initial flight. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, celebrated for his legendary feat of nursing a severely damaged Thunderbolt back to base after enduring over 200 hits, was appointed to lead the second. These were not neophyte airmen prone to panic should unforeseen circumstances arise. Rather, they were hardened combat veterans, distinguished by their profound experience and inherent ability to improvise effectively in the crucible of battle. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The meticulously planned assault materialized precisely as Colonel Zemke had envisioned. The formidable P-47 Thunderbolts materialized with terrifying suddenness, screaming across the landscape a mere 50 feet above the ground, their powerful engines roaring as they breached the western perimeter of Oschersleben airfield, even before German radar systems could register their unexpected intrusion. It was the Luftwaffe pilots on the ground who first caught sight of the incoming menace. Personnel who had been leisurely strolling towards their aircraft or diligently conducting pre-flight inspections instantly scrambled, diving precipitously for the relative safety of slit trenches as these 8-ton behemoths of war thundered overhead at speeds approaching 300 miles per hour, their passage a deafening testament to their destructive intent. The anti-aircraft batteries positioned on the western flank of the airfield, though few in number, belatedly commenced firing. However, their crews found themselves in a state of frantic disarray, desperately attempting to acquire and track targets that had already swept past their optimal firing trajectories. Captain Mahurin's lead flight executed its devastating pass over the primary dispersal area, where numerous FW-190s were arrayed in close proximity, wingtip to wingtip. His formidable armament, consisting of 4 .50 caliber machine guns housed within each wing, unleashed a continuous torrent of fire that scythed through 3 of the enemy fighters before he even necessitated a minor adjustment to his targeting. The armor-piercing incendiary rounds, designed for maximum destructive impact, perforated aluminum airframes, ignited volatile fuel tanks, and obliterated engine blocks with cataclysmic efficiency. 2 of the Focke-Wulfs erupted into immediate, spectacular explosions, while the third simply collapsed into a mangled heap as its crucial internal structure catastrophically failed under the relentless fusillade. Concurrently, Lieutenant Johnson's flight directed its concentrated firepower towards the northern revetments, where Messerschmitt Bf 109s were sheltered within their sandbagged protective emplacements. The ingenious reverse approach strategy enabled the American fighters to strike these positions from their rear quarter, precisely the sector where German engineers had failed to implement significant reinforcement. The substantial sandbag walls, meticulously constructed to shield the fighters from frontal assaults, proved utterly ineffectual against the torrent of fire originating from behind. Lieutenant Johnson, demonstrating exceptional marksmanship, personally obliterated 4 Messerschmitts in a single 5-second burst of sustained cannon fire. Across the airfield, the German flak crews descended into utter chaos. The formidable 37mm heavy guns, situated on the eastern side of the airfield, had been strategically positioned and optimized to engage incoming aircraft, not to contend with targets already directly overhead and rapidly receding. By the time the bewildered gunners could laboriously traverse their cumbersome weapons to face the retreating threat, the Thunderbolts were already in full eastward egress, maintaining maximum velocity at minimum altitude. A scattering of light anti-aircraft bursts pursued them into the distance, but the concentrated, devastating barrage that had typified previous conventional attacks on Oschersleben simply failed to materialize. The German defensive firewall, as it were, possessed a critical and fatal vulnerability, and Zemke's astute pilots had exploited it with surgical precision. The extraordinary operational outcome left 8th Fighter Command in a state of profound astonishment. The 56th Fighter Group had successfully annihilated 23 German aircraft on the ground at Oschersleben, a tally that represented more than double the typical destruction achieved during previous conventional raids. Even more significantly, every single one of the 16 P-47 Thunderbolts that had participated in the audacious assault returned safely to its home base. While a handful of aircraft sustained minor superficial damage from scattered flak, none suffered anything remotely serious. The mission concluded with an unprecedented record of 0 losses. This outcome was truly extraordinary, indeed virtually unheard of, for a strafing mission conducted against a target as heavily defended as Oschersleben. The resounding triumph achieved at Oschersleben transcended a mere one-time element of surprise against the German defenders. Colonel Zemke and his astute intelligence staff swiftly recognized that their innovative tactic had, in fact, laid bare a profound and systemic vulnerability embedded within the Luftwaffe's entire airfield defense doctrine. a weakness that could not be readily rectified. This inherent flaw, they understood, was deeply rooted in fundamental principles of physics, compounded by inherent engineering limitations of existing weaponry, and inextricably linked to the practical operational realities governing the day-to-day functioning of airfields. To fully grasp the devastating efficacy of these reverse pattern attacks, it becomes essential to scrutinize the precise sequence of events that unfolded during those critical 15 seconds when American fighters first emerged over the horizon. It is crucial to understand that German anti-aircraft artillery systems were far from autonomous. They were intricate mechanical beasts, demanding precise human coordination. Each formidable weapon necessitated a dedicated crew of 4 to 6 highly trained individuals, each with specific roles: a commander vocally relaying critical target bearings, loaders diligently feeding ammunition into the breech, gunners meticulously traversing the weapon and fine-tuning its elevation, and vigilant spotters continuously tracking the target's dynamic trajectory. The heavy 37mm and 40mm caliber guns, which posed the most significant threat to incoming aircraft, possessed traverse rates approximating 20 to 30 degrees per second. While this speed proved adequate for tracking an adversary moving predictably across their field of view, it was fundamentally insufficient for executing a complete 180-degree pivot when an unexpected target materialized from the diametrically opposite direction. In scenarios where American fighters launched conventional attacks from the eastern sector, German gun crews typically enjoyed a generous window of between 12 and 18 seconds from initial visual acquisition to the point where the enemy aircraft entered effective weapons range. Crucially, their guns were already prepositioned and oriented in the general direction of the anticipated threat. Gunners merely performed minor, precise adjustments. Loaders had a ready supply of ammunition at hand. Commanders, meanwhile, had committed pre-calculated firing solutions to memory. The entire process was analogous to a seasoned baseball player poised at home plate, fully anticipating a pitch he knew was coming. All preparatory actions had been completed, and execution was simply a matter of impeccable timing. The implementation of reverse pattern attacks, however, dramatically inverted this carefully calibrated equation. When American fighters initiated their approach from the western sector, German gun crews were compelled to physically rotate their formidable weapons through an approximate 180-degree arc, a half-circle traverse that consumed a critical 6 to 9 seconds for the heavy anti-aircraft guns. Yet, the American fighters were a mere 12 seconds away from being directly overhead. Consequently, by the time the German gunners could laboriously orient their weapons in the correct direction to engage, the P-47s were already in the midst of their devastating strafing runs on parked aircraft and commencing their rapid egress. The previously ample window for effective engagement, which had extended to approximately 15 seconds, precipitously collapsed to a mere 3 or 4 seconds of viable firing opportunity. Adding to the defenders' profound tactical disadvantage, the chosen egress route for the American fighters led them directly through what had traditionally served as the primary approach corridor, the eastern sector, where the most potent heavy anti-aircraft guns were strategically concentrated. However, these same fighters were now rapidly receding, moving away at high velocity and maintaining an extremely low altitude. A critical limitation of all flak guns, particularly the heavy variants, is their inherent inability to depress their barrels sufficiently to aim directly downwards. The majority of formidable German anti-aircraft weapons were mechanically incapable of depressing below a -3-degree angle. This meant that once an attacking aircraft descended below a specific altitude relative to the gun's emplacement, it became physically impossible for the weapon to acquire and engage it. American pilots, masterfully exploiting the inherent flaws of the reverse pattern attack, executed their egress at altitudes ranging from a mere 50 to 100 feet above the terrain, effectively placing themselves beneath the critical depression limits of the most dangerous German heavy weaponry. Furthermore, the intricate mathematics governing deflection shooting exacerbated the predicament for the beleaguered German gunners. The fundamental principle dictates that when a target traverses one's field of view, the gunner must aim ahead of it, effectively leading the target to ensure that the projectile and the aircraft converge at the same precise point in three-dimensional space. The exact magnitude of this required lead is contingent upon the target's velocity and its angle of approach. German anti-aircraft gunners had diligently honed these complex calculations through countless hours of rigorous training and practice, specifically for targets approaching from the east. However, when American fighters materialized from the western direction, all these ingrained calculations were instantaneously inverted. A gunner who had spent months, even years, developing the muscle memory to lead targets moving from left to right, was suddenly compelled to frantically recalculate for a right-to-left trajectory, all while under the immense pressure of live combat and with only precious seconds to execute. In this chaotic scenario, muscle memory, ordinarily an invaluable asset, transformed into a debilitating liability. Gunners instinctively applied their ingrained leading techniques in the incorrect direction, inadvertently dispatching their shells behind the rapidly moving American fighters rather than anticipating their future position. The profound scope of this debilitating issue was starkly illuminated by captured German documents dating from June 1944. These intelligence intercepts revealed that Luftwaffe airfield defense units were officially reporting significant and persistent difficulties in effectively engaging enemy fighters that launched attacks from unconventional, non-standard approach vectors. Consequently, these units urgently requested the extensive repositioning of their heavy flak batteries. Yet this is precisely where the harsh realities of operational logistics converge to forge an utterly unsolvable dilemma for the German High Command. The formidable anti-aircraft guns could not simply be shifted on a whim. Their existing emplacements had been meticulously chosen and fortified over years, based upon deeply entrenched defensive doctrine. Furthermore, these positions were intricately interwoven into complex communications networks, supplied by dedicated ammunition dumps strategically located for specific defensive sectors, and seamlessly integrated into the overarching layout and functionality of the entire airfield infrastructure. Any endeavor to relocate these critical assets would necessitate weeks of intensive engineering work, a luxury of time that the beleaguered German war machine simply did not possess. The initial scarcity of available training weeks did not impede the rapid dissemination of Zemke's groundbreaking achievement throughout the 8th Fighter Command. Commanders of fighter groups, who had been experiencing significant pilot losses during strafing incursions, were suddenly presented with an effective, tactical solution. By the latter part of May 1944, a mere few weeks before the critical D-Day landings, the innovative reverse pattern concept was being thoroughly briefed at both wing and command echelons.
Major General William Kepner, the commanding officer of the 8th Fighter Command, swiftly recognized this innovation as a potent force multiplier capable of fundamentally altering the landscape of the air superiority campaign over occupied Europe. The formal adoption of this strategy occurred with unprecedented speed, marking one of the swiftest tactical innovations in military history. Specifically, on May 22, 1944, 8th Fighter Command officially issued Tactical Directive 2244, which explicitly sanctioned reverse pattern strafing attacks against Luftwaffe airfields, and strongly advised group commanders to integrate this technique into their standard operational procedures. This directive, however, did not enforce its exclusive use. Conventional attacks still held their place depending on the specific target configuration and the existing defensive setup, but it bestowed official endorsement upon what had previously been Zemke's experimental approach. Just a fortnight prior to this formal directive, training cycles were intensified across the 30 fighter groups, strategically stationed in England. Pilots who had meticulously practiced conventional strafing runs for months were now compelled to completely recalibrate their approach. Preliminary practice missions conducted over RAF training fields clearly demonstrated that while the learning curve was undeniably steep, it remained entirely manageable. The most challenging aspect was not the actual aerial maneuvers, but rather the arduous task of overriding the ingrained instinct to attack along the runway axis. Seasoned pilots persistently gravitated towards aligning themselves with the longest dimension of the target. Squadron commanders had to emphatically stress that survival unequivocally superseded textbook geometrical considerations. The tangible positive results manifested almost instantaneously. Between May 21st and June 5, 1944, the two crucial weeks preceding the monumental Normandy invasion, 8th Fighter Command executed 63 strafing missions against Luftwaffe airfields strategically located in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. A significant 47 of these missions judiciously employed reverse pattern attacks. The observed loss rate dramatically plummeted from 8.3% per mission when utilizing conventional approaches to a remarkably low 2.1% when employing the reverse pattern tactics. More significantly, the rate of destruction inflicted upon German aircraft on the ground nearly doubled, escalating from an average of 1. 4 aircraft destroyed per attacking fighter to an impressive 2.6 aircraft destroyed per attacking fighter. The mathematical evidence was irrefutable. For every American fighter lost, the Luftwaffe was suffering substantially greater losses of aircraft destroyed on the ground compared to previous months. We invite you to stay with us and watch the conclusion of this video. Your like and subscription would be greatly appreciated. We encourage you to share your thoughts by commenting below, letting us know where you are from and what you think about the video's topic. Major Thomas Hayes, a distinguished pilot from the 357th Fighter Group, famously reported the obliteration of 6 Bf-109s in a singular reverse pattern pass against Juvincourt Airfield on June 3rd, subsequently executing a second pass that accounted for an additional 3 aircraft. His flight of 4 P-51 Mustangs collectively destroyed a staggering 27 German aircraft on that pivotal day, without incurring a single loss. Such impressive figures would have been utterly unattainable using traditional tactics. The 9th Air Force, primarily tasked with providing crucial tactical air support to ground forces, adopted this innovative technique even more swiftly than its 8th Air Force counterpart.
Their P-47 and P-38 units were already accustomed to operating at lower altitudes and possessed more extensive experience with specialized ground attack missions. When the reverse pattern doctrine permeated tactical fighter-bomber squadrons in early June, pilots who had previously harbored apprehension towards airfield strikes suddenly displayed enthusiasm and volunteered for these missions. The 362nd Fighter Group conducted 31 reverse pattern attacks between June 6th and June 30th, successfully annihilating over 200 German aircraft on airfields scattered across Normandy, while experiencing the loss of only 4 P-47s to enemy ground fire. Time. 2s. Intelligence evaluations derived from ultra-intercepts, which decoded crucial German communications, vividly illustrated that Luftwaffe units were desperately pleading for reinforced airfield defenses and reporting severe morale issues among their ground crews, who felt utterly defenseless against the novel American tactics. One particularly telling intercepted message from Luftwaffe 3 headquarters in mid-June lamented that enemy fighters now attacking from all vectors defensive preparations, insufficient urgent need for mobile flak batteries. The Luftwaffe was acutely aware of the unfolding situation. Their primary challenge lay in their inability to effectively counteract it. By July 1944, reverse pattern strafing had been firmly established as standard doctrine across both the 8th and 9th Air Forces. Training manuals underwent comprehensive updates. Gun camera footage showcasing successful attacks was widely disseminated as invaluable instructional material, and newly arrived pilots in the theater were thoroughly instructed in the technique even before their inaugural combat mission. What had originated as one colonel's meticulous, analytical approach to a pressing tactical problem had, in less than 2 months, become deeply institutionalized across the entirety of the American fighter force operating in Europe. The Luftwaffe, however, was not passively observing while American fighters systematically decimated their airfields. German commanders immediately recognized the profound threat and commenced implementing countermeasures with all the speed that wartime logistics would permit. The inherent difficulty was that every proposed solution inevitably encountered insurmountable constraints, pervasive resource shortages, immense time pressure, and the fundamental physical limitations inherent in airfield defense. The Americans had uncovered a critical vulnerability in the armor, and it became strikingly evident that this crack was, in fact, a deep-seated structural flaw. The initial German response was precisely what one would anticipate: a strategic repositioning of flak guns to adequately cover Western approaches. In the latter part of May and early June 1944, Luftwaffe airfield defense units received explicit directives to redistribute their anti-aircraft weaponry into more balanced perimeters. Heavy 37mm and 40mm guns, which had previously been concentrated in eastern sectors, were mandated to be relocated to establish overlapping fields of fire from all cardinal directions. On paper, this appeared to be a rational solution. In practical application, it proved to be a logistical nightmare of epic proportions. The relocation of a heavy flak position was an undertaking far more complex than simply moving a machine gun nest. Each 3.7 72mm Flak 43, complete with its mount, weighed in excess of 4,000 ABs and necessitated either a robust concrete foundation or heavily reinforced earthworks to withstand the powerful recoil forces, the intricate electrical targeting systems, secure ammunition storage bunkers, vital communications lines, and essential crew shelters all required complete reconstruction from their foundations. Engineering units conservatively estimated that 6 to 8 weeks would be required per position for proper relocation and re-zeroing of the weapons. The Luftwaffe simply did not possess that luxury of 6 weeks. The Allied invasion was already in full swing, and American fighters were relentlessly attacking airfields on a daily basis. Some desperate airfield commanders attempted makeshift solutions, positioning guns on temporary mounts devoid of proper foundations. These improvised installations were plagued by severe limitations. Without stable platforms, the accuracy of fire significantly degraded. The powerful recoil from rapid firing would cause the entire gun position to shift, severely compromising targeting precision. Crews frequently reported jamming issues and mechanical failures directly attributable to the intense vibrations. A hastily emplaced flak gun might manage to discharge a few bursts, but it conspicuously failed to deliver the concentrated, accurate fire that had initially rendered German airfield defenses so devastatingly effective. The Luftwaffe also endeavored to deploy mobile flak batteries, consisting of truck-mounted 20mm guns designed for rapid repositioning in response to attack vectors. These units began appearing in reconnaissance photographs by mid-June, typically positioned on roads encircling airfield perimeters, enabling them to swiftly move to threatened sectors. American pilots, however, adapted with remarkable speed, often within days. Instead of confining themselves to single-direction attacks, flights began assailing airfields from multiple vectors simultaneously. 4-ship flights would intelligently divide into 2 elements, attacking from opposing directions, thereby compelling the mobile flak units to choose which threat to engage, while the other element strafed unmolested. The inherent limitation was that mobile guns could not effectively be in 2 places at once. German engineers put forward proposals to entirely redesign airfield layouts, advocating for the creation of circular dispersal patterns, where defensive positions would possess equally effective fields of fire in all directions. Luftwaffe headquarters actually approved this ambitious plan in July 1944 and allocated precious resources to rebuild 6 major airfields in France according to these new specifications. However, a mere 3 weeks later, all 6 of these airfields fell into Allied hands, following the decisive Normandy breakout. Consequently, these elaborate defensive redesigns never progressed beyond the blueprint stage. The Luftwaffe also resorted to employing deception tactics. They meticulously created dummy flak positions on western approaches, sandbag emplacements meticulously arranged, with logs painted to convincingly resemble gun barrels, in the hope that American pilots would either avoid these sectors or waste valuable time evading non-existent threats. Ultra intercepts, however, exposed this strategy in early July, and the 8th Fighter Command promptly instructed its pilots to disregard suspected dummy positions unless they observed actual muzzle flashes. This deception proved ephemeral, lasting less than 2 weeks before pilots became adept at distinguishing between genuine and fabricated threats. Perhaps the most revealing German response emerged in late July, when several Luftwaffe fighter units simply abandoned forward airfields entirely, strategically pulling back to bases situated deeper within Germany, where American fighters possessed less loiter time for strafing attacks. This was not merely a tactical adjustment. It represented a poignant admission of defeat. By retreating eastward,
the Luftwaffe voluntarily relinquished operational flexibility and critical response time, effectively ceding air superiority over the battlefield in order to preserve their diminishing aircraft assets. Allied intelligence meticulously noted that some German fighter groups were compelled to fly combat missions from airfields located over 200 miles from the front lines, expending precious fuel merely to reach the battle area. The fundamental challenge in aerial combat involved the inherent vulnerabilities of airfields. These critical installations were, by their very nature, significant defensive liabilities. They could not be concealed from enemy observation, nor could they be relocated, and their operational requirements dictated predictable flight paths for aircraft taking off and landing, determined by prevailing wind conditions and meteorological factors. After American forces effectively proved the efficacy of launching assaults that defied these conventional flight patterns, there was no immediate or simple defensive response available. Any truly effective countermeasure would have necessitated a complete reconstruction of the existing defensive infrastructure from its foundations. Engaged in the arduous conflict of a two-front war, the Luftwaffe simply lacked the temporal capacity, material assets, or strategic flexibility to undertake such a monumental transformation. The innovative reverse pattern strafing technique, however, did not fade into obsolescence with the conclusion of World War II. The groundbreaking methods developed by Colonel Zama and his aviators, first demonstrated with remarkable success over Luftwaffe airfields in 1944, evolved into a fundamental military doctrine whose influence resonates powerfully throughout contemporary military aviation. The central tenet of this approach, to initiate an assault from an axis that the adversary least anticipates by shrewdly capitalizing on their ingrained operational presumptions, extended far beyond the particular tactical quandary it initially addressed. This potent concept subsequently became an indispensable instructional case study, meticulously examined and taught at every significant institution dedicated to air warfare globally. In the immediate aftermath of the global conflict, the nascent United States Air Force formally integrated the principles of reverse pattern attacks into its official ground attack doctrine. Notably, the comprehensive 1949 Manual Governing Fighter-Bomber Operations allocated an entire section to the utilization of non-standard approach vectors for the effective suppression of enemy air defenses. This instructional segment was, in essence, Colonel Zama's original strategic insight, albeit presented within the more formal and bureaucratic lexicon of military instruction. Pilots undergoing training for the impending Korean War meticulously reviewed gun camera footage captured during the 1944 strafing runs, utilizing these historical records as crucial instructional examples, demonstrating effective survival techniques within hostile and heavily fortified airspace. We genuinely hope you're finding this historical journey insightful. Please stay with us and watch the conclusion of this video to fully appreciate the enduring legacy of these tactical innovations. Your support is invaluable. We would be immensely grateful for your like and subscription. Additionally, we invite you to share in the comments where you are from and what your thoughts are on the topic discussed in this video. The Korean War served as a profound validation for the continued applicability of this strategy, even in the burgeoning jet age. As F-80 Shooting Stars and F-84 Thunderjets commenced their assaults on North Korean and Chinese airfields in 1951, they encountered elaborate defense networks that bore a striking resemblance to those previously utilized by the Luftwaffe. Multi-layered arrays of anti-aircraft artillery meticulously placed to counter anticipated
standard approach patterns. American aviators, drawing upon established training and a nascent institutional understanding, employed reverse pattern tactics with an almost innate proficiency, assaulting these airfields from unforeseen directions. These unconventional vectors successfully disoriented and surprised defenders, who were primarily arrayed for traditional predictable attacks. Consequently, the attrition rates for airfield interdiction missions in Korea were markedly less severe than strategic planners had initially forecast, largely attributable to the enduring institutional knowledge and tactical wisdom that had been successfully transferred from the European theater. The strategic implications of these operations did not escape the attention of the Soviet Union. Following a thorough analysis of American tactical deployments in Korea, Soviet military aviation theoreticians embarked on a comprehensive overhaul of their established airfield defense doctrine. By the mid-1950s, newly issued Soviet air defense manuals stipulated the implementation of full 360-degree coverage, incorporating intricate overlapping fire zones. These mandates explicitly identified American variable vector attacks as the primary threat model against which their defenses must be optimized. When American reconnaissance aircraft subsequently captured aerial imagery of Soviet airfields in the late 1950s, the distinctive circular defensive layouts were instantly discernible as direct and deliberate countermeasures, responding precisely to the groundbreaking tactical principles that Colonel Zama had first introduced just 15 years prior. The conflict in Vietnam ushered in yet another phase of tactical evolution. While surface-to-air missiles had predominantly supplanted traditional flak guns by the 1960s, the underlying strategic dilemma endured. Defensive forces continued to sight and orient their formidable weaponry according to anticipated and conventional assault trajectories. American Wild Weasel missions, involving highly specialized aircraft dedicated to the suppression of enemy air defenses, implemented operational tactics that were a direct lineage from the reverse pattern doctrine. Rather than prosecuting their attacks along the most obvious or logically predictable vectors, Wild Weasel crews intentionally navigated highly erratic and unpredictable flight paths. This deliberate unpredictability compelled North Vietnamese missile operators to engage in continuous repositioning and complex recalculations, thereby significantly diminishing the overall efficacy of their defensive systems. Contemporary stealth technology represents an advanced culmination of this foundational concept. Advanced aerial platforms, such as the F-22 and F-35, are meticulously engineered with radar cross-sections that exhibit substantial variability contingent upon the observer's viewing angle. The operational doctrine for deploying these cutting-edge aircraft places a strong emphasis on initiating engagements from specific axes where the adversary's radar detection capabilities are at their most vulnerable. This sophisticated strategy is, in essence, a high-technology manifestation of the original tactic of assaulting Luftwaffe airfields from an unexpected direction, for instance, from the west rather than the anticipated east. The inherent flexibility of this principle allows for its application across the entire spectrum of aerial combat, from close-quarters, visual-range gunfights to complex beyond-visual-range missile engagements. The Israeli Air Force, having thoroughly analyzed reverse pattern tactics, adeptly implemented these strategies during the pivotal 1967 Six-Day War. On June 5, 1967, Israeli fighter aircraft executed a series of extraordinarily devastating strikes that effectively annihilated the Egyptian Air Force while its assets were still on the ground. Crucially, these attacks were launched from the direction of the Mediterranean Sea, with the Israeli jets approaching from the north and west, flying over open water. This approach vector was deliberately chosen because it represented the area where Egyptian radar coverage was at its most attenuated, and where defensive emplacements were consequently at their most sparse. Egyptian airfields, it was observed, had been meticulously designed with their formidable defenses, primarily oriented and concentrated against perceived threats emanating from the east, which was the geographical direction of Israel. The Israeli forces masterfully capitalized on this fundamental defensive assumption, mirroring precisely how Colonel Zama had exploited German operational presumptions 23 years prior. In the present day, the esteemed United States Air Force Weapons School, situated at Nellis Air Force Base, continues to impart the fundamental concepts of reverse pattern tactics as an integral component of its rigorous curriculum for the suppression of enemy air defenses. Aspiring aviators and tactical specialists meticulously examine the Asher's Lean Raid, holding it up as a seminal historical illustration of profound tactical innovation, forged under the intense crucible of combat pressure. While the precise methodologies and technological tools have undeniably undergone significant transformation, modern aircraft now leverage sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities, employ advanced standoff weapons, and benefit from intricate network-centric coordination systems that were entirely inconceivable in 1944. The foundational strategic principle endures, steadfast and unaltered. The enduring maxim derived from this historical narrative is straightforward yet profound. Discern your adversary's expectations concerning your mode of attack, and then deliberately pursue an alternative course of action. What renders the reverse pattern narrative truly extraordinary is not merely its proven effectiveness. Rather, it is the astonishing fact that a single officer, armed with nothing more than a calculator and critical reconnaissance photographs, was able to precisely identify a significant operational vulnerability, conceive an ingenious solution, rigorously test this solution under the demanding crucible of live combat, and subsequently revolutionize the operational doctrine across an entire theater of war, all within a span of less than 8 weeks. In an epoch frequently characterized by critiques of military bureaucracies for their perceived sluggishness in adaptation, Colonel Zama's seminal innovation serves as compelling evidence that truly transformative concepts can gain rapid traction and implementation when human lives hang in the balance. The Luftwaffe had dedicated years to constructing comprehensive airfield defenses, meticulously optimized against a singular anticipated threat model. In stark contrast, Zama required only weeks to conclusively demonstrate the fundamental flaws in that very model. The profound repercussions of that initial insight continue to be discernible in the strategic methodologies employed by contemporary air forces for ground attack missions, even 8 decades subsequent to its original conception.